Welcome, guests, members, and friends to tonight's NAC at Home. Tonight, we are talking about the Highwaymen Project. My name is Charles Snyder, and along with my friend Laura Daly, I am one of the co-chairs of the Roundtable Committee at the National Arts Club. The National Arts Club is a 501c3. We are based in New York. Our mission is to promote, stimulate, foster public interest in the arts. We do that by hosting over 150 programs that are free to the public each year. That includes theatrical performances, poetry, literary readings, film screenings, concerts, and art exhibitions. Find us at nationalartsclub.org. Follow us as well on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, where you will be able to find this special program tomorrow. And now, the National Arts Club is privileged and honored to welcome our panel to discuss the Highwaymen Project, a film and a documentary series about a group of self-taught artists and their magnificent, realistic, and impressionist style oil paintings. The story behind the artists is as impressive, interesting, and as fascinating as their artwork. We are very lucky tonight. We're able to show a teaser from the upcoming film, The Highwaymen.
Oh, brother, can I tell you a tale?
We live in a world where black is black and white is white. Who would have thought all the colors in between would change our lives forever? In time, they would call us artists. But to most, we was known as the Highwaymen.
Now, allow me to introduce our panel, and then let's get this conversation started. Todd Thompson is founder of the production company Stars North, with 20 years of entertainment industry success in film and TV. Todd is producer and director of the feature film. Joy Kigin splits her time between success in acting, producing, and directing, and is the director of the documentary series. Gary Monroe is an author, photographer, and he's also published many books on the Highwaymen and is quite highly sought after as a speaker on the Highwaymen as well as on self-taught artists. Roger Lightle is a collector, dealer, as well as frequent speaker about the Highwaymen, as he is also curated many shows and has a very impressive collection of the artwork itself. Jeff Friday is CEO of ABFF Ventures, TV, film, live entertainment, and event production company. Jeff is also founder of the American Black Film Festival and joins us tonight as producer of the feature film, as well as executive producer of the documentary series. Mr. Al Black joins us. This is a true privilege. Thank you very much, Mr. Black. Mr. Black is one of the artists in the Highwaymen film and documentary series, one of the artists inducted into the Hall of Fame in the early 2000s. And Mr. Black's artwork hangs in many galleries and museums, including the Orlando Museum of Art, and in many private collections throughout the world. So we have a very exciting panel, a very exciting hour before us. I'd like to begin with Gary Monroe. Gary, if you could kick off with the story origin about the Highwaymen, please?
I'll be glad to. You have to go back to the 1950s in Florida, to the town of Fort Pierce, a backwater town, which didn't offer much to Black citizens in terms of a future, a successful future with which to raise a family. The odds were they'd wind up working on in orange groves and packing houses. But there were two outstanding people, Harold Newton and Alfred Hare, the two protagonists of this story. Newton began painting, he's a few years older than Alfred Hare, began painting in the early 1950s, comes back to Florida, to that area, and takes his paintings door to door because he didn't have a gallery representation at the time, never would have a gallery representation, being a Black man making interesting but unusual paintings. At the same time, Alfred Hare is graduating from high school. He had taken painting lessons on Saturday mornings with A.E. Beanie Backus, the white regionalist who's Florida's premier painter. He learned the formulas from Backus, and he quickly went about corrupting them to arrive at his own style, which pretty much is the style of the Highwaymen. Quickly painted images. A 2 by 3 foot oil painting could take as little as 30 or 40 minutes to paint. Often they'd paint 2 or 20 at a time. It was all about speed. And what they didn't quite bargain for, whereas Backus sold a painting for $250, knowing they couldn't match his salary without representation, Alfred and his cohort decided to paint paintings and sell them for $25. But to make the same money that Backus was making, they would have to paint 10 of them in the same amount of time. And what Alfred and his friends didn't bargain for was that by painting so quickly, they would inevitably corrupt the cherished concerns of classical landscape representation and arrive, in my opinion, at a fresher, more relevant type of image suited for their times and their clientele. In fact, this was a business. And their goal, Alfred's goal particularly, was to be a millionaire by his 35th birthday. So he had to crank these paintings out, and a cohort of about 8 of the artists were central to the phenomenon. Everybody painted differently, but with a shared style. And within a couple of years of 1960, when this took form, they were all, if they wanted to, they were all driving Cadillacs or Lincolns, had fancy cars, would set up bars along the way, would enjoy their nights at the High Life Fronton or the dog track. It's an incredible story of success against anybody's expectations of such. And after all is said and done, this group of 26 artists left the visual legacy of modern Florida to an estimated 250,000 oil paintings. They went dormant in 1980-ish, only to be recognized about 15 years later. And then when the book came out, they became folk heroes and celebrities, and paintings that were selling for $1 or $3 at yard sales and thrift stores were suddenly selling for hundreds of dollars and thousands of dollars, and some of them, especially by Newton, tens of thousands of dollars. So it's a pretty remarkable regeneration of what had happened in the 1960s and 70s. And now they're getting, thanks to Todd and other people, established in the American art culture. Still a well-kept secret in Florida, though, I think, although it's beginning to expand. Roger had told me that he sold paintings to, I think, 24 different states. So the word is catching on. And that's pretty much the overview of the story. I think one of the great things about it is this is a pretty rough area of Florida. And they had no name when they painted. They were named by Jim Fitch, a frame shop owner and gallerist in Sebring, Florida, who was friends with one of the more remote painters. And when Jim got wind, he went down to Fort Pierce and he dubbed them the Highwaymen. But if you think about their tenure, they had no name, no organization, no rules, no dues, no meetings. It was like spontaneous combustion. And as Marianne Carroll, the only female highway person, told me, was that, quote, we learn from one another's brushstrokes. So it's this kind of energy and spirited competition that kept them going. And of course, the rewards in terms of money was unfathomable, taking home $250 a day in the early 1960s. This is a snapshot of the backyard of Livingston Roberts, one of the key artists in the group. And it reminded me of how they told us that they used to congregate and paint often at night in their backyards. And you can see painting more than one painting at a time. And it was a very social enterprise. Barbecues, beer, friends, women, etc. And you can see, even though there's, I think, 4 paintings in that one snapshot, the paintings were never repeated. Everyone is intuitive and spontaneous. They might have used the same template, the same subject matter, but every painting is detailed and painted a little bit differently. So they're not like the cookie cut paintings that are on assembly line. The only assembly line is that they can do 4 or 5 or 10 at a time and crank out more paintings than had they labored over one. And it was a very simple marketing tool. If they have all the blues mixed up on their palette, they would paint all the skies from board to board. If they had all the greens painted, mixed on their palette, they would paint all the grasses. So it just saved a lot of time. And time was both money, but more importantly, time equated to their style. And the rest is history.
Gary, as an appraiser and as someone who also admires the work so much, I was thinking I would just love to hear from Mr. Black, because when I see these paintings, we know that they are of the Florida coast, but that impressionist style, you see some of them that are a rocky coast, and you would think that that is the south of France. You would think that it is perhaps a 19th century impressionist of the south of France. So it's just an amazing technique. Thanks again, Mr. Black. How did you discover your talent as a painter?
I was the salesman for the group, and the paintings would get scarred as I would be traveling around with them. And I would, I bought me some paint, and I started fixing the paintings and stuff when they get scarred.
Okay, so it started as repair almost.
Yes.
What a fascinating way to enter the art world.
Yes, yes.
Now, as the salesman, could you share with us that experience? What was that like?
Well, I was born and raised in a little small town in Barlow, Mississippi, on a plantation. And I know how to deal with people. Back in the 60s, it was kind of rough, but I know how to go in and present myself as a man. So I would go in and say, good morning. So my name is Al Black. I'm representing a hair artist. I wanted to know would you be interested in some paintings if it wouldn't take up too much of y'all's time. So that got me in the door. And after I got in the door, if they looked at them, I was a salesman anyway, and I would sell something. Once they give me a chance to come in, I know what to say and know how to act. So most of the time they were bound.
God, I have some friends in the art world who I bet would appreciate some tips and tricks from you, sir.
Yes.
Now, are you still painting? What are you doing as an artist today?
I paint every day, all day, and everything I painted sell.
Let me ask, sir, how did you settle on the coast? Did you appreciate the sunset more or the sunrise more? Or how did you and how do you decide what landscapes to paint?
Well, I do what the spirit said do. If the spirit tell me to paint a sunset, I'll paint a sunset. If it tell me to paint a moonlight, I paint a moonlight. If I go out and say, well, clouds look good this morning. I paint a daylight scene.
So it's like the artist's calling almost.
Yes.
Oh. So are you painting, or do you still have the chance to paint outdoors
That's
right
I have
now?
I have to paint. Yeah, I can paint outdoors now. I still paint outdoors. I have COPD, and the fumes inside kind of get me where I can't breathe now. So I go outside. I have a sit up, ease outside, and I go out there and paint.
Many artists would feel very lucky and blessed to be able to paint outdoors.
Yes.
I've looked at many of your works, sir, and I noticed that many of them have birds in them. Could you share with us a little bit of the significance of the birds in your art?
Well, those birds, they represent the Trinity, and it's one for the Father, one for the Son, and one for the Holy Spirit. And once I paint them birds, look like that paint got life in it, and it give me the better inspiration, in how they go about painting the next one. If you notice those birds got a meaning to them.
Well, it's different. It's unique from many of the paintings. It sticks out, and it's a very nice addition.
Yes.
Well, thank you for sharing, sir, about your inspiration and the background of the Highwaymen, and glad to hear that you are painting, and we will continue, following your artwork.
Okay, that would be good.
All right. Well, thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Black, thank you for joining us. And
hey, it is in the book, though. You can read it in Gary's book. It's all there.
Well, I was thinking, Gary and Roger, if you could pick up on the anecdote and what Mr. Black was sharing about the challenges of selling the artwork.
He had a knack. He had an ability, Al Black, to sell. Just a natural ability, and he was very successful at it. So that was something that he was the right fit for the Highwaymen to do what he did. And by doing so, by traveling the roads, he became an artist. How did he become an artist? He had to fix the paintings as they were damaged in transit. Sometimes they were marked up, and he had to be able to repair them. So that was his initial, involvement in creating the paintings. What you're being exposed to today is the American success story, starting from nothing. This group in 1954 in a little town called Gifford, just north of Vero Beach. Harold Newton starting to paint. They took a different path. They were generally, what was in front of them, something in the agricultural industry, picking fruit. That was a big source of income for the community in that era of time. They knew that wasn't a route that they could, it didn't work for them. They had a drive, they had the initiative, they had natural skills that had to be developed, which they clearly took that path. So it's an amazing story. It's how things transpired, and Al Black is part of that, and it is sales ability.
He's a legend, Al Black.
Yes, he is.
It's too profound to just write off to say he was a great salesman. It's when I was writing the first book, I'll be quick with this. I didn't interview Al because he was in prison. And I asked all of his friends about him, and I finally got permission to go into the prison. And that picture of him is in the prison. And I told his friends that I got DOC permission to go to the prison to interview Al and to see the murals he had painted throughout this prison. And they all kind of looked at me and smiled, and they said, "Don't believe a word the man tells you." And they were not being malicious. They were kind of laughing at me, sneering a little bit. So I went to meet Al. We spent 3 hours together, and I walked out of there. I believed every word he told me, and I still do. This is an incredible ability to convince people, and he softens them up, and he made his money. And as Roger pointed out, it was 30%, but often he would charge double the amount for a painting, and he would keep the 30% plus everything over the money that the painters were entitled to. And they knew that, and it was fine with them. So he was living a life of luxury very quickly as well. And in this prison, he painted 94 murals, and I documented each of them for the book I wrote about Al's journey. And Roger had pointed out that he learned to paint by fixing the paintings. These were oil paintings on board, and these guys didn't have time to let the oils dry. They were painting them at night and taking them out the next morning, and they would nest in the frames. They made their own frames so they would nest, and one would not scratch or lean up against the one behind it because they were all wet. But inevitably, one would smudge or get scratched. And Al started to paint by fixing them up and taught himself the rudimentary techniques that they used. And then he went at it as a full-fledged painter. And but he's a legend. He's the most colorful of the highwaymen.
Gary and Roger, I was thinking from what you gentlemen have shared, I'm thinking of some friends of mine in the modern and contemporary art galleries who could probably learn some lessons from Mr. Black. I mean, selling artwork is an art unto itself. We had a question. I thought this would be good timing. I mean, other than, again, some are realistic, some are more impressionist style coastal oil paintings, what are some other characteristics of highwaymen paintings? Are they usually signed, for instance?
May I answer that quickly? Yes, they're all signed. Although Al Black told the painters for whom he was representing that if they didn't sign the painting, he can sign it in front of the prospective buyer to hasten the sale. So many paintings that Willie Daniels had painted are signed by Al Black, but any of us that look at their paintings long enough can tell you from across the room who painted which paintings, but generally 99% were signed by the artist, and usually with a lot of flair. But to answer your question, I think what we call their fast painting define their style. And they painted so fast that the images are primarily very gestural, very sketchy, and hence very suggestive. I think by painting fast, they stripped away the artifice by which professional artists made their name in their paintings to arrive at the archetype, the essentialness of the scenes that they had painted. They weren't embellished. They weren't carried away. They just painted quickly to get the basics down. And they arrived at their own style by painting quickly. And yet, like Willie Daniels, who painted these pictures, was an incredibly gifted painter. And I think the most important in terms of exemplifying the highwayman aesthetic. It doesn't fall prey to professional paintings of the era. There's something, I don't want to say funky, but something just uniquely their own, that dreamy postcards sent to the tropics. And I think people can just walk into their paintings because they're not quite as pretentious as they might be if they were more belabored. And people just connected viscerally with these paintings. And I saw somebody had asked how many paintings. The estimates are between 200,000 and 250,000 oil paintings. It's a phenomenal number. Now, they didn't keep inventories or records, so nobody's sure exactly how many paintings were created. But I know that the number is rather high.
Gary, this is secondary to the craftsmanship and the talent. But what I think is so wonderful are that the paintings are a snapshot. It's like a time capsule of 1950s, 1960s Florida.
Yeah, you're so right, Charles. They captured that mid-century spirit. And I think a lot of it had to do with during World War II, Florida was a huge military training camp from Key West to Jacksonville to Pensacola to Tampa to Orlando. There could have been 2 million people stationed in Florida. And I'm from Miami Beach. I grew up in South Beach. And I've seen postcards and photographs of young men training on Ocean Drive. It's about a 14-block span on the beach in January without wearing shirts, but having a gas mask on their face, doing calisthenics. If you are fortunate enough to survive the horrors of war, what do you come back remembering? You remember this paradise that you were stationed in called Florida. And it's no wonder that Florida and Southern California became the places to live the American dream. And they would come down here, and they might have been disillusioned when they found out about mosquitoes and cockroaches, but nevertheless, you hang one of these paintings still glowing because the oils are still wet onto your cinder block wall, and your modest home is transformed to this picture window onto paradise. I mean, it was a perfect, I don't want to say formula, but the paintings were just so well calibrated to the needs and interests of the middle-class consumers.
Gary, this is a question for you or for Roger. Could you share the significance of that induction to the Florida Hall of Fame? And we've also had a question about there was a lady who was part of the Highwaymen as well.
There she is.
I believe that, okay.
Gary, you talk about it. You made the submission in 2004 and got them inducted into the Florida.
Yeah. It's a Florida Artists Hall of Fame, and they're in with very good company. James Rosenquist, Robert Rauschenberg, Tennessee Williams, Ernest Hemingway, Ray Charles, Zora Neale Hurston, and it goes on and on. And I nominated them one Sunday afternoon. I was sitting idle for a few minutes, and I got a call from the Secretary of State, who's that woman in the top left picture next to me. And congratulations. I said, for what? She goes, your nomination was successful. That. And it was the first time they ever inducted a group as opposed to one artist. And that's the group up there. The woman, Marianne Carroll, next to Mrs. Obama there, is the Highwaywoman. She passed away just over a year ago, I think, just 13 months ago. Very dynamic woman, kept up with the guys, tougher than most of them, raised 7 children as a single parent, and made quite a contribution, not just to the art, but to the sense of empowerment to females and people that are alienated from the mainstream or marginalized. She was quite a force.
Roger, as a collector and curator, would you share a little bit about why the appeal to you personally for these works, and then the broader appeal to the broader art market?
What happened with me, I did see the typical Highwaymen paintings that were being created currently. Then one evening I was in Cocoa Beach to a very early collector who amassed 108 key paintings by the core members within the group. That night, I transformed into I didn't set out to be an art collector, but that night it changed a path. I was over his home till 12 o'clock at night. I was pulled over by the police on the way home. They let me go for speeding, but that night I couldn't sleep because I was exposed to something of significance. If you see these very important, these early paintings, a lot of them are the daily life scenes. They recorded their neighborhood, what their daily life, those images by looking out their front door. They're very significant, and the painting ability of these artists is shocking if you're exposed to, as an example, what we did at the Orlando Museum of Art. Those paintings in those museums, everything's elevated when you're exposed to that type of paintings that they produce, that group. Those early paintings, generally the ones that I'm attracted to are very significant are the ones that were painted in the 50s and early 60s. So they're very unique. They were doing something, trying to create a life for themselves by painting. Clearly they had to paint well enough to sell. That was an obstacle they had to overcome initially, which through trial and error, they didn't quit. They were very, they stuck to it. You know, they are the role models for others that, you know, may not think that they have anything to offer or know what's their future in front of them. Look at the Highwaymen. By being, you know, persevering and continuing this path, the paintings that they created, it's pretty amazing. This broad group of paintings that they produce. Every once in a while, a new painting will come out of the woodwork from somewhere, you know, and it can be a very compelling painting, a very significant painting, and they are out there. They're here, there, and everywhere. They're across the United States. I've bought them in Oregon, San Francisco, Utah, Texas. I mean, they're just, you know, they're here, there, and everywhere. So the story did start in Florida. It spread out across our nation. I know someone who bought 3 in Alaska, and then I know someone who has one in Hawaii. So I would imagine the continental United States, there's probably a painting, Highwayman painting somewhere in every state in our nation. So it's just if you were able to see as an example, the museum that the exhibit we had in the Orlando, that kind of tells the story. You know, you don't need to, if you were able to be exposed to those paintings, then you have a good understanding why I would be involved. They're that well done.
Well, Roger, Gary, thank you both for your insight from some of the questions and the conversation going on. This is yes, an inspiring story, and it almost, you know, that you think of the term definition self-taught artist as far as, you know, relating to someone learning the craft and the technique and how to draw, paint, or, you know, create in whatever medium they work in. But I mean, this is self-taught artist as far as making a business, as you said, you know, working with a variety of people, working with each other. So it's just a fantastic story, which I think this is perfect timing. Jeff and Todd, if you could please share, gentlemen, your involvement, how you got connected to the Highwaymen or how they got connected to you, and tell us about the upcoming film.
Oh, thanks, Charles. I'll start off if you don't mind. So I enjoyed a 21 plus career with Disney, the Walt Disney Company, as a director of their creative services, doing commercials and whatnot. And one day after, I was always involved in film though, ever since I was a kid. And I had recently done a little short film called The Paper Route. And then a Disney entertainment attorney friend of mine, a colleague at Disney, took me to lunch just to congratulate me for my little success with the short film and whatnot. And but you know, her real reason for taking me to lunch was to ask me the question, you know, have you ever heard of Alfred Hare? Have you ever heard of the Highwaymen? And that was about, I mean, honest to God, about 15, 20 years ago. And the day she sat me down to tell me that story was the day I got hooked. And, you know, very similar to what Roger and Gary have talked about just, you know, just getting absorbed by these paintings when you first see them. I was so absorbed by the story when I first heard it. I mean, to me, it was this story of the American dream. It was a story of hard work and persistence. I'm a very entrepreneurial person, so I just really related to Alfred Hare the minute I learned about him. And I was just instantly hooked. And, you know, one thing led to another. Val introduced me to a pretty big collector here in Florida named Jeff Cook, who in turn introduced me to my very first artist, which was James Gibson, who sadly is no longer with us. But you know, it's like peeling back the layers of an onion with these guys and learning, you know, who each of the 26 artists were, and the fact that there was one woman involved in the group, Marianne Carroll. And as we got deeper and deeper into the research, I mean, every one of them could warrant their own story. Obviously, you know, Gary's published numerous books on individuals because their stories are so individually rich. I of course, you know, set off in my mind to do a feature film. So there were certain challenges with that, which elements of the story, were the most important to work into the structure of a feature film script. But from all that work also came the realization that, we need to do more than just a feature film. This is such an amazing story. Nobody knows about the story. It's a hidden gem. It's such a hidden figures type story, where you hear it and you're like, I can't believe I never knew this. And you just become so enthralled by it. But it became really quickly apparent that, while the feature film was going to be amazing, these artists, they deserved, more. So the genesis and the idea for also producing a companion documentary series came out of that, which is when I, brought Joey Kigin into the mix and to help me produce that. And then of course, we got a great opportunity to meet Jeff Friday, who's an amazing producer, and we're just so excited to be collaborating with him. But it's been this 15 to 20 year journey, just relentlessly every single day. I mean, there's not a day that goes by I don't think about Highwaymen. I don't work about Highwaymen. Just driving to get us finally into production. And I have to also just throw in a little plug for the National Arts Club, because one of the reasons why we are in production right now on the doc series is thanks to a really dear friend of mine named Mark Cosgrove, who's a member of the National Arts Club. And it's just people with this devotion and dedication to art and the understanding of what art means and the power art holds for people. It's people like that just really get behind this project and help bring it to fruition, because without them, we'd still be spinning our wheels. So it's been an extremely exciting, long journey. It's certainly nowhere close to being over, but that was my hook. It's a kind of a very long answer, but that's how I got involved.
And now Jeff is working with you as well. Jeff, could you share your involvement, support, and inspiration, how you got involved in the Highwaymen Project, please?
Sure, it'd be my pleasure. So about 25, can you guys hear me?
Excellent, yes.
About 25 years ago, I left a very comfortable job on Madison Avenue in Manhattan in advertising to be a champion of Black arts and Black artists. But that work was primarily done in the film and television space. I've started a film festival, which happens to be in South Beach, go Gary, called the American Black Film Festival. And in I think it was 2019, maybe January or February, my love affair with this story started. I was reading it. There was a New York Times article called Overlooked, and it was about African Americans who famous, well accomplished African Americans who had not had obituaries in the New York Times. And I don't know if you guys remember the article or not, but one of the subjects of that article was Alfred. And I read the article. I was on a plane. I didn't think much about it, but I thought it was a fascinating story. Fast forward about a year, my dear friend and manager, Cameron Mitchell, who was also part of our team, said that he had a client. He told me about Todd and Joy, and he mentioned the story, and I remembered the article. And I don't believe in coincidences. I just don't believe it's just an amazing coincidence. It was meant for me to be involved in this story. I think it's one of the most fascinating American stories. And to Todd's point, it is a hidden figures type story. It deserves to be a film. I'm a film producer. I've got relationships with HBO and Sony and other major studios, and we are going to make this movie. I will not be satisfied until the feature film is produced and we've made $200 million, and also our documentary film is in market. And I do think there's a true market, particularly now with this focus on diversity and our awakening, the awakening about the inequities in art and film and culture. I think this is the perfect time for us to tell this story for the broadest audience possible. And we're very excited to be a part of it. So,
Well, this will make you happy. As I've been working the chat and the Q&A while listening, of course, but we've had many, many questions about how do I get in touch with, how do I follow the Highwaymen Project? How do I keep up with this film? So bravo on the progress, and it sounds like, yes, people are going to be interested in this story.
Hey, Todd, do we have a social media accounts for the film yet? Have you set that up yet? Because that'd be a great way to keep folks dialed in.
Yeah, we have a dedicated Highwaymen Facebook page. We have a dedicated Stars North Facebook page. We have a dedicated starsnorth.com website. So the project's, listed on all those platforms. And as we reach different milestones, or as special events such as this roundtable came up, we post on those sites and keep people updated as often as we can. So absolutely.
And Jeff, you have allies at the National Arts Club too. So we, we are very interested in this story as well.
I appreciate that.
Jeff, Todd, the sister to the Highwaymen film is the documentary series that Joy is producing. So I was thinking we're probably just at the right time to shift to hearing about the Highwaymen documentary series with Joy Kigin.
Thank you. Thank you so much to you all for having us. The Highwayman story is such an important story, and stories like this need to be told, I think. And I think we probably are all of like mind on that. But the thing about this story is, as Todd said, when he began starting this journey years ago, and he started to work on the film and figure out what part of that story he could tell through the film, it became apparent. I mean, there are 26 artists who are inducted into the Florida's Artists Hall of Fame. And that's a lot of stories, and certainly too many than you can tell in 2 hours. So we decided a multi-part documentary series. Still working out how many episodes that will be. But we decided a documentary series would be a great way to tell the whole story, because you get to include the artists, you get to go into detail about each one of them, and go into detail about the art. I saw in the chat a couple of people were asking specific things on their technique and things, the framing. And we can definitely get into that here in just a second, but I wanted you to know I saw that. The framing and the materials they used, and not just the technique of how they did it quickly as well. But we can get into all of that in the documentary series, and we can also get into the people who are around these artists, who have been a part of their story, the collectors, the people within the community who are a part of Florida's, sort of heritage in one way or another. And then also its place, this story and this art and these people's place in art history, in Black art history, in the history of our country. So I think there's just really, it's a fresh, exciting story that we want to tell in a fresh, exciting way. And that's entertaining, but also really fun and educational, and tells us a really inspiring story that we wouldn't know otherwise. It's a really fun project to be working on. So we've got this multi-part thing going on. We are 31 interviews in, so we are definitely into production, which is awesome. We're working through our artists. We've been able to, to safely go through. And that's the thing about documentaries, is you have such a small crew, it's a lot easier to be safe. So we've been able to work this last year, which is really exciting. We do have a trailer, and no, I cannot share it with you publicly because we are still in production. We've got, different processes we have to go through, but I would love to share it with anyone on this call who's interested. You just will reach out to me, and we'll get into that in a second, where you can reach out to me personally and reach out to Todd about the film. But we definitely would be happy to share with you the trailer with the interviews that we've captured thus far. But it's shaping up to be an exciting journey for sure.
I mean, talk about a project, Joy, exciting, but the unlimited potential just in the preparation for this call. As long as Todd, you and I have been in conversations about this hour, a dear friend of mine who is an appraiser shared with me that she had appraised a collection of Highwaymen art. Then another friend of mine who is an art writer saw some of the Highwaymen art in Switzerland in 2019, for instance. And then another friend who is an art consultant shared with me also. She lives in Houston and has a client who has given her the instructions, please buy me any Highwaymen painting that you can see whenever. So as everyone on the panel has shared, the appeal is global and widespread and broad in the story. I mean, imagine when the story is told.
It's contagious.
It is.
I
It
think,
is. It's hard. And when someone, even when you buy one painting, it's really hard. There, I think, Roger, you're always saying you can never just buy one painting. They're like Pringles. You never just buy one. All of a sudden, you've got to have different artists. You've got to have different vistas. You've got to have. There's so many options, and it once you buy one, it makes a collector out of you. And there's something interesting about highwaymen art collectors, is that they have a tendency to buy and buy and buy and buy because of all those options, and because there's so many different types of paintings out there. And then they buy until they physically cannot buy anymore because they've run out of space in their home and their gallery and their office and everywhere else. It is a contagious, wonderful thing to be a part of.
There's a gentleman in South Florida named John Jetson. He recently passed away, but he owned a series of home appliance outlets, if you will. And he just owned thousands of highwayman paintings, every single one of his showrooms. I mean, think about going in to buy a washer, dryer, refrigerator, microwave, and the walls are just adorned with highwayman art from corner to corner. And then you go into his corporate headquarters, and I mean, I don't think there was a warehouse space like left empty. There was just thousands of paintings. And I don't, part of the documentary series is going to really explore the obsession, call it an addiction if you want, of why this happens. But as Joy mentioned, like once somebody buys one, they can't stop with one. It's like candy. They just got to keep eating it up. Or Pringles. I love Pringles, Joy.
It was a Lay's potato chip commercial, but nevertheless.
There you go. But it's a phenomena, and it's just amazing to be part of this story, and have the responsibility. As an artist, I've had the pleasure of recently completing a film about Nichelle Nichols and her journey with NASA, bringing diversity to the space program. I'm working on a Beatles project right now. I found myself, becoming the steward of some of these very important, very significant stories. And since day one, since 20 some years ago, the moment I heard the story, I just knew that this was a huge responsibility to take on, and to tell this story the right way, both in a dramatic feature film, and then of course in a multi-part documentary series. The attention to detail and the accuracy is so paramount for me personally. And I speak on behalf of the team. We're preserving a piece of history here that not only will be entertaining, but I think the world's going to learn a lot from, and generations are going to continue to learn from, passing it down.
Well,
sorry, go ahead, Charles.
Whose painting are we seeing right now, please?
Well, this is actually, this is our signature painting from the movie. This is going to be a very important prop in the film. This is going to be our MacGuffin, if you will. This image we're looking at is going to be the device that takes us through the story. And as we watch from beginning to end, we're going to understand how this painting came to be, why it was never signed, and we didn't touch upon this on the call yet, but how these birds showed up on the painting. There's a signature trademark that Al Black is known for in adding 3 birds to a painting. And, because they painted so quickly, and because, he would show up the next day and stack all these paintings in the car, a lot of times they would get scarred. And a scarred painting is a painting that's, smudged because the oil's still wet. So I think it's safe to say that, Al got his first taste at becoming an artist by covering up some of these scars by adding the 3 birds. And they're very symbolic. One stands for the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And that's a major plot point in our story. And then of course there's a little twist at the end, and you get to figure out, why and how this all came to be. But what we're looking at here is the signature image from the film.
We had a number of questions. People were very curious about which artist had completed this. Joy, I'm sorry I interrupted you there. You were going on about the documentary.
Oh, yeah. So, well, it was more about just the art and the presence, the story, and why we find this so important. Um, it's, this story is something, and these artists and their art was something that seemed to get stuck at the Florida border. And there for years, I mean, there's, yes, of course, by nature, they were sold in the early days within Florida, by the nature of how they were sold. But then over time, it still continues to sort of be stuck in the South. And I think there's something just kind of wonderful. And that's one of the reasons why this call in particular is so wonderful, is that you all are hosting and highlighting the highwaymen in a way that's frankly never been done before in the Northeast like this. So we're just really excited to start this conversation on a bigger scale, and thrilled to be here doing that for that reason.
Well, as I've said, you all have allies at the National Arts Club. I must ask, we've got time for Q&A, but we've had more than one of our guests ask, could someone on the panel please share a little bit more about that trick of selling, that trick of the trade of selling that Mr. Black was sharing? I mean, selling artwork is never easy, but how the highwaymen accomplished to sell their artwork, must be a story. Could someone please go back to that, please?
I can give it a shot. Yeah.
I think we're all victim to it too. Like Jim Gary, just let me tell you a real quick little anecdote. Joey and I went down to Fort Pierce for a scouting trip, and I mean, we weren't down there to shop for paintings, but sure enough, we drove home with 3 or 4 of them in the car, and our boy Al, he just has a way of making sure you don't leave home empty-handed. Let's put it that way. Go ahead, Jared.
The name Highwaymen was again dubbed to them 15 or 16 years after their enterprise went dormant. And the connotation is that they would set up at a gas station, but that's not true. They were not selling chenille bedspreads. They had the audacity of hope before the phrase was coined in the 1950s and 60s. They were very differential. They would knock on professional offices. These would be white people's offices, lawyers, realtors, doctors, et cetera, and as Al said, very politely introduced themselves. May I show you some paintings? And it seems like people just bought them because the painting spoke to them. It was easy to sell these paintings. Similarly, they would go on Friday afternoons, which was payday, to banks, and they would ask the manager if they may please set up 10 or 12 paintings. They put them on the floor in the bank, and they told me that they didn't sell them, that people would come to them with $25 and take a painting. It was that easy. And I think it's because they just hit a nerve that these paintings are so attuned to something that we receive so viscerally, that we know and that we cherish, which is, again, an extension of the 19th century idea of the sublime in landscape painting. And some people bought them because they were, quote unquote, doing good, respecting the fact that these are 20 somethings, respecting the fact that these young men were doing good work and were so polite, etc. But they sold like hotcakes. It is phenomenal. And let me give you just one thing on my mind. We're talking about stories and stories and stories. This is a ready-made story. In August of 1970, it said that Alfred Hare was going to move a day or so later to Hallandale in South Florida, where his dad lived, to capitalize on the bigger business opportunities and do 100 paintings at a time and sell them to a company like Modern Age, a furniture company in South Florida. And he's out at a place called Eddie's. It's a juke joint on Avenue D. And Avenue D was the social hub of Lincoln Park, the Black community where most of these artists lived and grew up. And there's a painting of Eddie's place there by Harold Newton. And long story short, they're out drinking. I've been there and I've read a lot of reports about the place and the incident I'm about to share with you. This was the place to be. It's Sunday night. There are 2 jukeboxes. Eddie's behind the bar, rolling his cigar from side to side. The place is packed with people smoking and enjoying the music and cavorting and spilling out onto the sidewalks. And this other man, Jules Funderburk, worked in the fields as a truck driver. And came up to Alfred and Livingston Roberts, Alfred's good friend and one of the key painters, and they were sort of, respectful but not paying too much attention. And they noticed that Funderburk is getting a bit hot under the collar. And I'm talking about a girl, because Alfred was movie star handsome and charismatic in the best sense of the word. And they're talking and playing, and Livingston doesn't know why Funderburk is getting edgy and says, "You want some money? Here's some money." He throws him some money. He goes, "I don't want your money." And he walks out and he walks back with a gun. And sadly, he hits Livingston with the gun and turns around and he shoots Alfred in the chest. And Alfred goes out the side and comes back, where they wrestled, comes back in and goes to the front where his car was parked. And he's rushed to the hospital. Everybody's in shock, of course, and he dies en route to the hospital. Alfred was 29 years old, on top of his game, and the father of 6. You couldn't make this up. And the man who gave legs to his friends to make life, to live creatively. I mean, it's an incredibly dramatic ending to a very, very beautiful and sad story.
Well, that I could see the documentary series, again, as just endless, as well as the film, of course, endless possibilities and stories. The challenges, to put it very, very mildly, of being a Black artist in Jim Crow South. I mean, this is a fascinating story that you were all working on. And, we are at the top of the hour. We do have some questions that we would like answered. But for everyone who has a question that we do not answer, Joy, could you share that slide, please, of how people can stay in touch with you? Perfect. We had a question. Tell us a little bit, with the technique and style, were all of these framed with that fast dry? And a frame is not easy to construct or come by either. So we had some questions. Can you tell us about the frames that one sees with these paintings?
Well,
Roger, you want to take that?
Yeah, Roger, you want to? He's on mute. Well, while he's unmuting, I mean, one thing we didn't really sort of touched upon was these original paintings. They were so, the resources were so scarce. They would paint on material called Upson board, which basically like a drywall material they would use in new construction for homes. And a lot of times they would use house paint, oil paints, of course. But then they would take the crown molding from the door frames and frame these these paintings up to give them the look that they have today. But so some of the more original Highwaymen paintings can be identified by the material that they're printed on.
What they framed these with was actually cypress molding, crown molding. You literally have to order it specialty today. It was probably a common material at that point in time. You remove the existing paint off of it. They did paint with house paint, but only the frames themselves. All the paintings by the Highwaymen are in oil. So the frames themselves, to buy the material alone for one of these typical paintings that they sold for $25, the frame material today is $50, but they sold the entire painting in that era of time for $25. So they had to fabricate the frames, then they highlighted with, it was a latex paint, and then they modified it to with gold flaking type, just give it an antique look to it. So the frames are important. Gary Monroe early talked about the frames that Harold Newton put on his paintings. They were not the typical frames. They were always a higher level. A lot of those were notched to highlight the painting. So they did modify these frames to highlight the paintings, which, they were trying to find that path, what sold, whatever they had to do, whether it was the frames themselves and then paintings, obviously, but the frames are significant. But Harold Newton had the most significant frames out of any of the Highwaymen artists that were produced.
Another question we had, we're so lucky we've got an audience who could be dialing in from anywhere. So we've had more than one guest ask, outside of the Orlando Museum of Art, are there other museums that have significant collections?
The first exhibition of Highwayman art in a major Florida art museum was about 12 years ago at the Fort Lauderdale Museum of Art. And the current show, or the show that just came down from the Orlando Museum of Art, which I also curated, is traveling to is at the Tampa Museum of Art now. But most, as you can imagine, many curators who are well-trained in modern and contemporary aesthetics still look at Highwayman paintings as a novelty, as giant postcards, as a little bit kitschy. But those of us that have a connection to the land and a free sense of spirit in terms of the paintings, we accept them wholeheartedly. But it's just starting to reach that level of better art museums considering and interpreting and exhibiting the paintings.
So we did have another exhibit at the Vero Beach Museum of Art. Every year they're exhibited at the Bacchus Museum in Fort Pierce. And then this summer we will be at Selby Gardens in Sarasota. So they're traveling. People want to see these paintings, so they are around.
And outside the state of Florida, I know there was a gentleman who became a collector who actually lives in Canada, and there were multiple, and I believe someone mentioned that in one of the chat comments as well. There were multiple exhibits throughout Canada a few years back, and then also the Florida House in Washington, D.C. housed about 50 paintings as well, this gentleman's collection. And so there are, but as you can see, I mean, Gary's talking about the fact that the first exhibit, a major exhibit, was only 12 years ago. And Roger, every single one of the exhibits that Roger's talking about is something that he and, a small group of people are spearheading these efforts, right? So it's just a small group of collectors and folks who are truly interested in getting the word out. And then this other gentleman was, just sort of doing another thing on his own. It's this like sort of kind of grassroots effort that seems to find, that seems to be, but building the momentum, but that momentum does seem to actually be, really starting to build now, which is great.
I mean, I think the appeal, these are just wonderful landscape paintings. Again, I see such impressionist style in some of them.
Yes.
It's beyond just the Florida coast. Like I had said earlier, you look at some of these and you might think that it's the south of France. Just wonderful landscapes. We're getting near time. I mean, there's a reason that you're doing a film, and there's a reason that you're doing a multi-series documentary about this group of artists. And so we encourage everyone who has joined us for this hour to please stay in touch with Todd and Joy to continue, to stay up to date on this project and the film. If Joy and Todd, if you each wanted to share some closing remarks, then I will close the program for us.
Ladies first.
Well, again, thank you so much for having us. I know we were kind of, as you can tell, if you're not familiar with the Highwayman story already, there's a lot to it. There are so many components, which is exactly what Charles just said, why we're doing a movie and why we're also doing a documentary series. And there's just so much to share, so much to enjoy, and so much to learn. So, of course, 45 minutes plus Q&A is not a lot of time for us to kind of share all the ins and outs that we would love to, because clearly we're in love with these folks and their story and their work and their legacy. So please feel free to reach out. If you have specific questions about the film, I suggest that you reach out to Todd, and his email address is there. And if you have specific questions about the documentary, then also you have my email address as well. And then, as they said, on Facebook, and then also through the website as well. But the best and most direct way to get it get to us is through those email addresses. All righty. Thank you so much for having us. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, I just want to echo, Joy's sentiment. And it's a complete honor to be part of this roundtable and to be able to share this very, very, very special story with your members and our community. The story ironically took place, during a very racially segregated and racially charged time. And, you like to think that we're much further ahead these days, but in a lot of ways, the news reminds us that we're not. And what I think what really resonates with this story with me is no matter what our circumstances, the human spirit always prevails. And if, to be able to celebrate and to be able to recognize and celebrate what Harold Newton and Alfred Hare did, and how a gentleman like Bean Backus, an artist like Bean Backus, who had a very open door policy back in a time when that really wasn't the norm, just what a difference that made. And, we're here today talking about it 50, 60 years later because of these gentlemen having open minds and these gentlemen, pursuing their dreams and knowing that there's a better way. There's always a way. And as a filmmaker, what I'm personally dedicated to is telling those stories that truly enlighten mankind. And if people can learn about the story and enjoy this film, but most importantly, walk away with understanding that no matter what the circumstances, you too can make it. You too can make it happen. I think we've done our job.
Well, thank you very much. Please share the thanks and gratitude from all the guests, as well as from the National Arts Club, to Mr. Black for joining us and sharing some of his time with us. And we would like to thank you, Jeff, Roger, Gary, Todd, and Joy, on behalf of the National Arts Club. You have friends in New York. Please do let me know when you are in New York so that we can stay in touch and give a tour of the club to you. And we would like to thank everybody who joined this call. You can see how to stay in touch with everyone who's involved with the Highwaymen Project. And if you'd like to learn more about the National Arts Club, if you are interested in becoming a member of the National Arts Club, contact us at admissions@thenationalartsclub.org. So on behalf of the Roundtable Committee at the National Arts Club, thank you, everyone, and good night.
Thank you, Charles. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you all.